welcome to my GAMMANS YouTube channel. This week I'm back to doing cityscapes, yay! So I'm going to take you from the start to the finish of creating cityscapes. I have jumped little sections and also done that thing where I take photographs so you guys can see a real close-up of what I'm doing, but because the whole process is so long, I have had to jump a little bit, otherwise you'd be watching it for days and nobody wants that. As per usual, please do like and subscribe because it helps other people find the videos and also it just makes my day. So yeah, if you could do that, the subscribe button is literally just down there, and so is the thumbs up button. Just click it, just do it now. And also, if you leave me a comment, I will get back to you either in written form or I will answer your question on the videos. So yeah, please feel free to write me a comment if you feel so inclined. But most importantly, please do enjoy the video. Here you go. So the main part here was getting the perspective right for what I've outlined as the cityscape. So I've got the two bridges, one in the foreground, one in the background, and just really important to get that perspective right as it looks like you're looking out through the Thames across the bridges. Once again, I'm starting with the sky and I'm using the pool yellow and the white and just creating that sort of sunset effect with the pink and mixing the two in. That's magenta I'm using. And as I get further and further out towards the piece, the colours get a little bit deeper. So they're going to go from yellow to pinky to purple. And I'm also using the same yellow in the pink to make that orangey colour. So again, the colours match. I talked about that a lot on the last video about colour matching and how that works and how effective it can be when you're blending colours and how important it is that they contain the same pigments. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm just a little bit of orange towards the sides just so that it warms the piece a little bit and also kind of emulates the idea that the city is creating a little bit of a glow on the horizon, which I quite like as well. The background colour is an ultramarine and a cerulean blue that I've mixed together to create a smoky blue effect, and there's purple in the distance as well. I'm also using the same background colour that I'm using for the sky, so that is again ultramarine and cerulean, and I'm just sort of creating that layer of texture with the background colour. And it's important to have a background colour down so that when I go over it with the buildings and the cities and the twinkly lights, it's important to have a backdrop that really complements the rest of the piece. It doesn't look out of place and it's not too dark and not too light. So I've used a very medium colour that isn't too dark and it's the same as that blue in the sky. So just building up that foreground texture as I have been doing with the other pieces, and I'm just sort of sticking to a cooler palette at the moment with splashes of orange and yellow to really bring out certain areas, but keeping it quite tame at the moment. And then as I get further and further into developing that area, I'm really going to build up those textures, build up those colours, use the drippy effect that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, and create a very abstract area that is in contention with the rest of the detail but also kind of complements it at the same time. Overall, I'm trying to create a harmony and a balance between the detailed areas and the more abstract areas, and this is just so that the eye isn't too overwhelmed with one aspect of painting and it doesn't look too abstract so you can't see what it is, but it's the combination of those two, and that is something that I've really enjoyed exploring with my work. You can see at the moment I'm really starting to add some darker bits to the piece, and that's really going to give the piece a sense of depth. You can see me at the moment adding low lights and highlights to different areas, and that is mainly because by setting off those light lights against the dark darks, your mind sort of can create an image in itself using the contours and the shapes and things like that. So it's about playing with the abstraction and almost letting the mind run away with itself, letting it create the image and the shapes itself. Now I'm doing that thing I talked about earlier on the right hand side now, which is to create a backdrop for the city and the detail of the buildings and things. So I've gone with the light colour of the blues and the turquoises and the ultramarine, that's the same that's in the sky, so it's reflected down. And the reason I've gone with that colour is just, as I said before, it's not too bright, it's not too dull, it's not too dark, it's just right, so it creates a really good canvas for the detail of the city. I sort of hopped around at stages as well, just because sometimes it's hard to visualise what the painting's going to look like until I've done certain aspects. So those really big areas like the sky and the reflections and the abstract bit of the left-hand corners sometimes need to be done first, just so that I can get a grasp of what the painting is going to look like, and then work on the detail bits from there. So I'm really just doing those big sections, like the bottom you can see I'm working on now, and where the picture's eventually sort of going to fade to a sort of darkness and almost a thicker water, it looks like, as we get further and further away from the detailed areas. And I've done the reflection, I've done the sky, I've done the left bottom hand corner, the abstract bit, and it's really just getting those big sections down so you can start to work from the big to the small, which is such an easier way to do it than the other way around, because if you start with detailed areas, it becomes really hard to see the bigger picture sometimes. Now I'm building up the right hand side just under the bridge and towards the foreground of the painting, and really what I'm trying to do here is create a shading effect, but instead of just using flat colour and shading downwards, I've sort of gone for the drippy effect because it adds interest, it adds texture, it adds a sense of the 3D as well, and it's just a nicer way for me to kind of add a little bit of depth to the painting instead of just shading, as I said, in a more regular way. Also, it's interesting because it takes out the detail from certain areas and makes it look like almost the scene is sort of dripping down, and it creates a real sense of movement as to the painting too. Also, I'm trying to get some of those vertical accents in as well to counterbalance the very strong horizontal lines of the bridge and the horizon line, and I talk about that a lot actually, and that's what the painting is, that's what the harmony of the painting is creating a real balance between vertical and horizontal, and with balance with colours, etc. So I'm just adding some vertical lines to counterbalance those horizontals. You can see me working on the details of the buildings now, and I'm using the same colours I used for the bottom left abstract side. I'm mirroring those colours in the actual city because I really want to keep those tones similar. I don't want to introduce too many new colours because it can look too much and eventually can lose the rhythm of the piece, it can lose the harmony. First thing I do when I'm creating that skyline in the cityscape is I pick out those important monuments. So you can see I'm doing hints of Big Ben in the distance at the moment, and it's really important to get those particular iconic buildings right, because they're the things that people are going to recognise in the painting, and that's what's going to locate it and contextualise the piece. So those bits I usually do first, just to make sure that the context is there and I can work around the really iconic and important infrastructures like Big Ben, like the London Eye, which I'm going to put in later as well. I'm now using my palette knife to really build up certain areas of the cityscape, and it's really important to get that texture in there, otherwise it can look a bit flat, it can look a bit lifeless. So I use the edge of my palette knife to just create a sense of the 3D, and also just because, as I said, it stops it looking so flat and it adds interest, and texture is always interesting to look at. So I'm just building up these areas and building up the colours, the layers, and always going over with a palette knife to give some sense of sculpture to the piece too. One other thing it's also worth talking about is how distance is created in the paintings such as this, and whilst the lines do give a certain sense of perspective and distance, it also can be created using lighter colours and just slightly altering the palette and the hues of those tones. So at the moment I'm doing a really farthest away imagery and of the city, and I'm just slightly lightening the colours, adding a little bit of white. You can see a close-up there, it's just slightly lighter blues and turquoises, which just help to sort of create distance in the piece. The colours still do have to be dark enough though, so that when I add the twinkly lights and I do those in a really bright yellow or a white colour, they still have to show up. So it has to be blue enough that it shows the twinkly lights, but also light enough that it looks like it's in the distance. I really enjoy working on the embankment bit actually, because this is where the vibrancy in the piece is really going to come through, because we all know the embankment to be a place of sort of lively things going on and the beautiful lights, and it's just a really pretty area. So I'm really concentrating on making those lights obvious and just building up that area so it looks like things are going on and it's buzzy, and you can afford to really add some texture to that area because that's where the detail's going to be and that's where most things are going on. The foreground bridge is probably the bit where I had to be most careful and detailed about what I was doing, because as I said, it is in the foreground and it's going to really draw a focus, and it is probably the most detailed part of the piece. So I really made sure to create the depth and 3D look by shading, and that's done with a really, really dark Prussian blue in its purest form. So I've not diluted that at all. That's how I've got that really, really dark colour. So I'm just working on the bridge and with a brush, and I'm creating, I'm looking at images you can't really see, but I'm using my iPad to just look at images of London, of the bridge itself, just to see what those forms and what those contours actually look like, and so that I can be accurate as well, because I think it is important that it has a sense of reality to it as well as it just being an impression. I think it's really nice if it's grounded in reality and grounded in an accurate scene of London. So I'm just bringing to life those buildings and those bridges by just contouring them, giving them some really dark layers and some really, really light layers to just sort of emphasize that that's a structure. And and then I'm dragging that reflection down as well, because not forgetting that it is water, so it is going to have that beautiful reflection. And I concentrate more on the bridge in the foreground in a later stage, which you'll see me do. But it is really, really important that I do drag those colours down, because that's going to emulate the idea of reflection. This is probably the most iconic bit that I do in all my pieces, and that is the reflection and the light. And it's really, really important to make a big deal out of that bit, because that is going to be the real strong vertical accent, again counterbalancing the horizontal, but also it's just going to give it a sense of life and movement and dynamism, because it's bright light reflecting in the water, and that again contextualizes it, that it's sunset, that it's evening, but also just the fact that it's movement and light and all those transient things that I've put all together, the twinkly lights and the reflections and the sunset. Saying before that it's really, really important to make sure that the embankment looks bright and it looks friendly. So what I've done is I've got my palette and I've got thick white paint, and then I'm just dragging it down as if that is the then part of the reflection. The lights are reflecting in the water, and that for some reason just really adds a sense of vivacity to the piece. I think because also there are a lot of darker areas, and particularly the right hand side of the embankment is really, really dark, so those bright colours really, really do contrast with the darkness and really, really show up, and that again, those layers of darkness against the strong brightness of other colours really does create a kind of a sense of movement and a sense of texture and overall interest. Most of what's happening at this stage is me adding details and finalising the textural bits. So once I've got those block colours down, and once I know what colour things are going to be, then I can start to add the textures and the colours, because if you're adding texture too soon, it can be really, really tricky, because then you just find yourself carving into a picture that you're not sure what it actually looks like, but you've got a lot of paint to deal with, and it can be really distracting and difficult. So it's better to have a flatter colour and then work on it and build up the texture at the very end. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm just adding bits here and there, so it looks more, instead of as stages as I've talked you through, it looks more like a finished overall piece, a well-rounded piece. So I'm looking at it, this involves a lot of me stepping back, looking at it, taking photos, which I do an awful lot of as well. Obviously you can't see that, I've sped it up and cut those bits out, but I am doing a lot of that reflecting. Also, the blowing technique is where I just water down the paint with, well, I say water, actually using white spirit, and then I just flick it or blow it, and it creates a really nice splattery light effect. It looks like the dispersion and the refraction of light has just bounced off those little areas in the foreground, and the abstraction also helps to break up really intense bits of colour and in kind of intense sections that look a bit too plain or too simple. And it kind of just adds a little bit of detail. It's sort of a trick I like to use as well, and I do it as well when I'm doing, as you can see, I'm working on the bridge. I do a little bit of splattery light at the bottom, so it almost looks like the water lapping up against the edges of the bridge, and that can really create a nice effect. And again, it's really important to have those areas of interest in what would otherwise be a very flat area of just water. You still need to kind of build it up. So I've got the drippy bits to one end, I've got the reflections, and another end I've got the light coming down from the centre, and I've got, as you can see the close-up, I've got those areas of texture around the base of the bridge, which is really, really important.
I'm using here what was almost like a pipette, which is going to create, you can see me using it there, there's a close up, it's going to create those little twinkly lights, and it's just those little dots and certain areas of detail which has been really hard to get with a brush. So I'm just really finalising those bits of detail, finalising those twinkly lights, and just bringing to life the piece as a whole, adding some shading in there for the bridge so it looks like it's sort of on the water and there's still going to be that shadow created. And just adding bits and bobs here and there. You can see I'm using it again. I'm doing the background and just adding in those twinkly lights, adding life and texture as well to the piece. And I'm just sort of building it up until I think that it looks accurate as what it would look like, and just make sure it looks bright. You can see here I'm just sort of, there you go, there's a close up there of the embankment. I'm just sort of blowing as well on those bits to create a sense of splattery light. And this is me painting the London Eye. I'm doing it really last because it's going on top of the underneath of the painting. So I've used the little pipette and also a paintbrush to shade those areas and add in the little bubble carts and just sort of finalising those really detailed areas there with the pipette. And there you go, that is the finished painting.
So there you go, I hope that you enjoyed watching me paint the cityscape, and yeah, please like and subscribe and comment, and see you next week.